Thanks to the wildly distributed efforts of numerous Imperial iterators, the story of Primarch Roboute Guilliman, his early life and his finding is widely known and well accounted for, in stark contrast to certain others of the Primarchs. Much of these accounts have, of course, served the role of edification for the masses and the demands of Imperial propaganda over the millennia. But between the accounts, variously embellished, a number of consistent facts and themes do emerge. According to Imperial legend, the Emperor of Mankind created the Primarchs from artificially engineered genes using his own genome as part of the original template, carefully imbuing each of them with unique, superhuman powers. Imperial doctrine goes on to tell how the ruinous powers of chaos spirited away the Primarchs within their gestation capsules, scattering them wildly across the galaxy through the warp. More than one of the capsules was breached whilst it drifted through warp space. The forces of the Monasterium leaked in, wreaking havoc on the gestation being inside the capsule. Undoubtedly, damage was done, and chaos corruption affected several of the Primarchs, although the nature of that corruption would not become apparent until the Horus Heresy. After drifting for solar decades, or in some cases even hundreds of Terran years, the 20 gestation capsules came to rest on human-settled worlds throughout the Milky Way galaxy. Distant planets inhabited by a variety of human cultures, and whether by fickle fate or cruel design, each world would provide a crucible which would temper the superhuman child into the Primarch they would become, be that hero or monster, tyrant or liberator. The capsule containing the developing form of one Primarch fell upon the world of Macragge in the eastern fringe of the galaxy. Macragge was a bleak but not inhospitable world, part of a decayed star empire of ages past that mankind had inhabited for many standard centuries since the time of the Dark Age of technology. Its industries had survived intact, and its people had retained an authoritarian but cohesive society. Macragge had remarkably preserved a number of antiquated short-range warp-capable craft, which could be utilized for near-stellar transit, conditions permitting, and its people continued to build sub-light voidcraft even during the time of the most intense warp storms during the Age of Strife. This had allowed the people of the planet to maintain contact with several neighboring human-settled star systems, despite the warp storm's fury, and so retain a tenuous link to the rest of human space and the knowledge that it was not alone in the darkness. So it was that when the Primarch's fallen capsule was discovered by a group of magnates who were on a hunt in a local forest, they knew it immediately for a device of advanced technology rather than a thing of superstition and magic. The magnates broke the capsule's seal and discovered a strikingly beautiful and perfectly formed human child within it who was surrounded by a glowing nimbus of power. The child was brought before Guilliman, one of a pair of nobles who bore the title Consul, whose authority governed the most civilized and powerful region of Macragge, and Connor adopted the infant as his own son in a manner not uncommon to his culture, naming him Roboute. The young Primarch grew unnaturally quickly, and as he did so, his unique physical and mental powers became obvious to all. It is recorded that by the time of his 10th birthday, he had mastered everything the wisest tutors of Macragge could teach him. His insight into matters of history, philosophy, and science astonished his teachers, while his recall was absolute, and his ability to extrapolate accurate conclusions from fragmentary information was said to border on the inexplicable. His greatest talent, however, lay in the art of war, which was itself treated as a high and lauded science in Macrage's culture. As soon as he had attained his legal majority, Roboute's foster father, Guilliman, immediately granted him command over an expeditionary force sent to pacify the far northern lands of Macragge. Named Illyrium, it was a barbarous land of outcasts and petty warring micro-states that had long harbored brigands and mercenaries who raided more civilized lands as often as they hired themselves as foot soldiers to fight their neighbors' wars. Roboute fought a brilliant campaign and won both the submission and the respect of the fierce Illyrium warrior bands. But when he returned to his home from the northern frontier, he found the capital city of Macragge Civitas in turmoil. During his absence, Guilliman's co-consul, a man named Guilliman, had unleashed a coup d'etat against Connor, a development far from unknown historically, if in this instance a surprise. Guilliman, it transpired, had long harbored designs on undiluted rulership, and had conspired with those amongst the wealthy nobility of Macragge who were jealous of Connor's political power and popularity, and also increasingly afraid of his preternaturally precocious foster child's future. These malcontents represented Macrage's ancient regime, an aristocracy whose wealth was manifested by vast estates which were supported by the toiling of a multitude of impoverished vassals. Guilliman, backed by Macrage's industrial magnates, rivals to the old regime, had moved to challenge this balance of power, forcing the aristocracy to provide their vassals with increased living standards and rights before the law, weakening the aristocracy's stranglehold on the polity. Connor had also passed legislation that obliged the nobility of Macragge to begin an ambitious program of improving the long-neglected infrastructure of their nation and enlarging the capital city at their own expense. These reforms made him all but unassailable in the common people's eyes, but were highly unpopular among all but a few of the more far-sighted aristocrats. As Roboute Guilliman and his triumphant army approached the city of Macragge Civitas, they saw the smoke from a multitude of fires and encountered citizens fleeing from the city in anarchy, and Roboute learned that Guilliman's private army had attacked the Senate House, while Connor and his loyal honor guard troops had been inside. The refugees each told the same story: that rebel soldiers had attacked the Senate, whilst a drunken mob, instigated by Guilliman, but now out of anybody's control, roamed the city burning, looting, and murdering. Roboute hurried to his foster father's rescue, leaving his own troops to deal with the drunken rioters without quarter. He personally fought his way towards the center of the city, passing the bloody work of rebel firing squads everywhere in the government district, but at the Senate House found himself too late. All was a bullet-ridden and blasted ruin, and even the rebels, it seemed, had fled the scene to join the looting. There, in the half-collapsed shelters beneath the building, he found his father dying. For 3 solar days, the wounded consul had directed the defense of the besieged Senate House, even as surgeons fought for his life following a botched assassination attempt on the Senate floor which had touched off the conspiracy's chaotic attack. It is apocryphally said that as he gasped out his last breath, Connor Guilliman detailed the extent of Galan's betrayal to his beloved foster son, and named those whose hands were stained with his blood. Roboute's cold rage at his foster father's death was unstoppable. With the full backing of his army and the beleaguered citizens of Macragge Civitas, he crushed the aristocratic rebels, scattering their hireling armies, and lined the streets with the hanging bodies of the rioters, thereby quickly restoring order to the capital city and the surrounding lands. Thousands of citizens flocked to the Senate House, and amidst a wave of popular acclaim, he assumed the mantle of the sole and now all-powerful Consul of Macragge. The new ruler broke the old aristocratic order and stripped from them their lands and titles. Galan and his fellow conspirators were seized, the ringleaders publicly executed, and the rest sentenced to hard labor, rebuilding the city they had ruined, stone by stone, by hand. It was not a sentence they would long survive. In the new order, loyal soldiers and hard-working settlers were granted rights where the oppressive aristocracy had once held sway. With superhuman energy and the singularity of vision only a Primarch was capable of executing, the new consul reorganized the social order of Macragge, creating a ruthlessly enforced meritocracy where the hard-working prospered and the honorable received positions of high office, and those who shirked the law or worked against the good of the whole faced draconian but faultlessly even-handed punishment. The stagnated and uneven economy was reordered, technology disseminated rather than hoarded by the elite, and the planetary armed forces were transformed into a powerful and well-equipped force. Macragge flourished as never before. One people and one order, united under the unchallengeable rule of Roboute Guilliman. Around the time that the young Roboute waged war in Illyria, the Emperor's Principia Imperialis fleet of the Great Crusade had reached the planet of Espandor in circa 832 M30, at the outer edge of the network of worlds with which Macragge had maintained tenebrous contact. From the Espandorians, the Emperor learned of the existence of Macragge and the extraordinary son of Consul Connor Guilliman, and from what he learned, he knew that this child could be none other than a missing Primarch. There have been some who have suggested that the Emperor's arrival at Espandor and the isolated region so far from the front line of the Great Crusade's main spur of progress was no accident, and that by some arts he had perceived or had foreknowledge of what he would find. Regardless, what followed was certainly not foreseen. As the Emperor's fleet quickly moved on to Macragge, it was almost immediately deflected by violent warp squalls which had risen up to separate it and a handful of nearby systems from approach, thwarted by a power even the Emperor could not readily ignore. It would be something in the region of 5 standard years before contact could be successfully attempted. In the years that intervened, Macragge had undergone a striking transformation. It was now a world of uniformity and order, prosperous and productive. Its cities had been rebuilt in glittering marble and shining steel, and the serried ranks of its armies were well armed and well equipped, and outfitting themselves now for operations beyond their own world. For even before the Emperor's arrival, Roboute Guilliman, it is said, had dwelt much on the ancient histories contained from his world's deposed aristocracy, and the fragments he found there telling of the ancient interstellar domains of mankind, and he had begun to dream of new horizons and new worlds to conquer, of a domain beyond the seas of night, or to use the ancient scholarly form found in the text, Ultramar. By his will, he made it so, and within their warp-sealed enclave, vessels from Macragge now plied regular and well-patrolled trade routes with local star systems, bringing raw materials and people to the flourishing world, while against some of its neighbors, short victorious conflicts had already been waged to pacify the strife they had found there. It is said that when the Emperor finally saw what his lost gene son had wrought in 837 M30, he was indeed pleased, and that he met Roboute without the dissembling that had been needed with those Primarchs he had found of more savage timber, such as Leman Russ, Pharaoh's Manus, Mortarion, and Vulcan. It is further recorded that once Guilliman learned the truth of his origins, he immediately swore his fealty to the Emperor, for he knew that he was his true father. For he had already theorized correctly the purpose for which he had not been born so much as deliberately created. It was immediately apparent to Imperial observers that Roboute Guilliman possessed a powerful analytical intelligence, even when compared to the transhuman cognitive abilities of his peers, as well as a talent for statecraft and macro-organization of staggering potential. Yet few could then guess what such talents harnessed to the Great Crusade would go on to achieve.